Hello, this is Devlog number 2 of my project to try to release a game before Christmas. So it's obviously not going to be a fully fledged game. The plan is to release it as an early access release for a much reduced price, and then hopefully gain some traction and feedback and just continuously update the game. So the first thing I wanted to tackle was animations. There are obviously going to be very simplistic animations. However, I have very little experience with this. So I just made a simple animation of a sheep bobbing up and down, and I'm just hooking this up to the relevant Unity objects. So this was pretty fiddly for someone with no experience of using the animations in Unity. However, it's an easy process to replicate in the future for other animations. So as you can see, I got it working there and thought it would be a good time to scale down the sheep so he wasn't so gigantic. However, he ended up pretty skinny. I'm not sure why this happened. Just a fresh rerun managed to fix the issue. So now we have a more realistic sized sheep. And as you can see, I added some code for movement detection on the enemy movement script in order to set the animation to move only when the game object is in motion. So I thought the best place to start would be to create functional sheep. And part of that is to have like a sheep pen where they will sit, and that will be ultimately what you're trying to defend. So I used AI to generate my sheep pen, similar to my sheep model. As you can see, it took a while and also needed a reference image. However, the output was pretty good, and it was certainly far quicker than I would achieve this in. So as you can see, it's spawned into the map, and the sheep spawns inside it. However, there's no collision, and so the sheep will just run straight through it. This just required some changes to the Python script to ensure everything was included in the same mesh, and then the application of a mesh collider to the sheep pen object. So as you can see, there's now a collider on the sheep pen, and the sheep is now stuck inside the pen, and ultimately, instead of running at me, because he's currently an enemy prefab, he will just run about the pen. So the first thing I needed to do was to decouple the sheep model from the enemy prefab, and then so I could treat it as a sheep and apply sheep behavior to this new prefab. So long story short, I had to reorganize my scripts in order to enforce some sort of folder structure. And as I mentioned in my first devlog, the standard design pattern is to have a manager which manages a certain entity class, and then on that entity there will be a reference to the rendered prefab, and the logic to do with animation or anything to do with that rendered prefab will be on that prefab class. This just helps to segregate the logic and allows for easier readability and therefore quicker development for myself, the developer. But every developer will have a different preferred design pattern. So without boring you, that's essentially what I spent about 2 hours doing. And as a result, you can see both an enemy prefab and the new sheep prefab spawning in. So although there were 2 sheep in the last clip, one was an enemy prefab and one was a sheep prefab, but they're functionally identical. So I'm just changing the behavior and the relationships between the different entities for this new sheep prefab. instead of having the sheep already spawned in the scene, the spawning will be taken care of by the sheep pen manager. And so the sheep pen manager will instantiate a new sheep object, and then the sheep object will instantiate its prefab object, and thus the rendered sheep will spawn. So this mostly worked. However, as you can see, the sheep spawns on the very corner of the sheep pen. So I asked AI about this, and it told me that a collider has a reference to a center point on it. So I created a reference to the sheep pen collider on the sheep pen prefab, and this is accessible from anywhere in the project via the sheep pen manager. And so when the sheep is spawning, it takes this collider and spawns it on the center point. And now the sheep is spawning inside the pen. So finally I wanted to make the sheep prefab actually act like a sheep instead of inheriting the enemy behavior, which is to just run at me. So again, I asked AI to generate me some code. However, I think this might have been more trouble than it was worth, as the sheep refused to move, and I ended up having to spam the AI with quite a bit of code. Ultimately got it working, and then just started trimming a lot of the excess code away. And I think ultimately I got what I wanted. So you can see the sheep bobbing around here inside his pen. Don't know what else a sheep does when it's idling, but that's what we've got for now. Finally, I just want to say, if anyone has any suggestions, feel free to comment, even about the name of the game. At the minute, it's Defend the Sheep. Not sure how great that is. And also thanks to everyone who subscribed. I know it's only double digits, but I certainly got more than I was expecting. And thanks for watching.